I have not used the elevator in the Hadley Library since the second week of February of the previous year. The stairs add about 12 minutes to my circulation rounds. The medical waiver I filed with university facilities cites a vestibular condition that does not exist on any of my medical records, and my supervisor accepted it without follow-up because I had been reliable for 6 years and because the university does not push back on accommodations from staff who do not cause problems. I take the stairs. I take them at every shift. I take them even when I am moving heavy returns from the basement archive to the second floor reshelving carts. The stairs are part of the routine I have built around what happened in late January and early February of that year. And the routine is the only reason I have continued working at the library at all. I am 36 years old. I am a paraprofessional librarian at a small private university in central Maine, working the overnight shift in the Maine Library, which serves about 1,800 undergraduates and a small graduate program. The library is open 24 hours during the academic semesters, with reduced staffing after midnight. I am the only employee in the building from midnight to 7 a.m. I handle returns, reshelving, light cleaning, and any student requests for materials that are stored in the closed stacks section in the basement. The job is quiet. The pay is modest but steady. The benefits include tuition remission, which I have been using to slowly complete a master's degree in library science through a remote program. Yes, the combination of the schedule, the pay, the benefits, and the isolation has been, for most of my time at the library, exactly what I needed. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I'm asking because the events I'm about to describe occurred during a specific window of overnight hours, and I want to know how many of you are awake during the same window in your own time zones, doing whatever you do at hours when most people are asleep. The reason I am finally telling this story is that the elevator was repaired 3 weeks ago. The University Facilities Department had taken the elevator out of service in late February of the previous year after a series of mechanical failures that had been documented in the maintenance logs. The elevator had been out of service for 14 months. Actually, the repairs had taken a long time because the elevator was an older model and the parts had to be sourced from a specialty vendor. The elevator was returned to service 3 weeks ago, and a notice was sent to all library staff informing us that the elevator was operational again and that we should resume normal use. I have not resumed normal use. I have continued to take the stairs. My supervisor noticed last week and asked me whether my vestibular condition was still affecting me. I told her it was. She accepted the answer without question. The elevator returning to service is what made me decide to record this. I have known for the past 3 weeks that I was going to need to make a decision about whether to continue avoiding the elevator indefinitely or to face the question of whether I had been right to avoid it in the first place. I have not made the decision yet. I am recording this account in the hope that articulating what happened will help me decide. I am also recording it because I have come to believe that the events that occurred in the elevator were not unique to me, and that the recording of them may be useful to whoever encounters them next. I want to give you the events as I remember them, with the qualification that my memory of the events is imperfect and that I have been reconstructing them in the months since from a combination of memory, the library's electronic records, the security camera footage that I retained on a personal hard drive before facilities replaced the recording system in March, and a small notebook in which I have been documenting my reconstructions as they have developed. The reconstruction is not, by any standard, complete. Now, I am giving you what I have. The events began, as far as I can identify a starting point, on the night of January 22nd of the previous year. I had been working the overnight shift at the library for 6 years by that point. I knew the building thoroughly. I had developed routines that allowed me to complete my work efficiently and to spend most of my shift on my own studies, which the library permitted as long as the work was completed and the building was secure. The night of January 22nd was a Monday. The semester had just resumed after the winter break. The library had been quieter than usual because the students were still settling back into their schedules. I had logged in at 11:47 p.m., relieving the evening staff, and had begun my standard shift routine. The standard routine started with a building sweep. Yes, I would walk through every floor, checking that the public areas were unoccupied, or that the few students still studying were where they were supposed to be, that the emergency exits were closed and undisturbed, and that the various building systems were functioning normally. The building sweep took approximately 35 minutes. It involved using the elevator to move between floors because the building had 4 floors above ground and 1 basement level, and the elevator was significantly faster than the stairs. On the night of January 22nd, I started the sweep at 12:04 a.m. I took the elevator from the 1st floor to the 4th floor and worked my way down. The 4th floor was clear. The 3rd floor had 2 students at study carrels, both of whom acknowledged me when I checked on them. The 2nd floor was clear, as the 1st floor had 3 students at the main study tables and 1 student at the reference desk computer. The basement level, which housed the closed stacks and the special collections, was clear, as it almost always was during overnight hours. I returned to the 1st floor at 12:39 a.m. and logged the completed sweep in the shift log on the circulation desk computer. I want to be precise about the timing of what happened next, because the timing has become important in my reconstruction. At 12:41 a.m., 2 minutes after I logged the sweep, I received a request notification on the circulation desk computer. The notification was for a book retrieval from the closed stacks. A student had submitted a request through the library's online system and had specified that they would pick up the book at the circulation desk during the overnight shift. The notification included the student's name, the book's call number, and the location of the book in the closed stacks. The student's name was Madeline Forster. The book was a collection of essays on early American agriculture, published in 1962. The call number indicated that the book was in the basement, in the older section of the closed stacks, in an aisle that was not frequently accessed. I did not recognize Madeline Forster's name, but the request appeared to be a normal academic request, and I had no reason to question it. I logged the request as received and prepared to retrieve the book. I took the elevator from the 1st floor to the basement. The elevator was the only way to access the basement from the public areas of the library. There was a stairwell that led to the basement, but the stairwell access was controlled by a keycard system, and the basement door at the bottom of the stairwell was kept locked except during emergencies. The elevator was the standard route for both staff and the rare students who were granted basement access for research purposes. The elevator descended normally. The doors opened at the basement level. I stepped out into the basement hallway. The hallway was lit by overhead fluorescent fixtures. The closed stacks were behind a metal door at the end of the hallway, secured by a keycard reader. I walked to the door, scanned my keycard, and entered the closed stacks. I retrieved the book. The book was where the call number indicated it should be, and I checked the title against the request. The title matched. I carried the book back through the closed stacks, out the metal door, and to the elevator. I pressed the call button. The elevator was where I had left it, doors closed, on the basement level. The doors opened immediately. I stepped inside. I pressed the button for the first floor. The doors closed. The elevator began to ascend. This is where my reconstruction becomes uncertain. The elevator should have ascended directly to the first floor. The journey should have taken approximately 15 seconds. Instead, the elevator stopped between the basement and the first floor. The display above the door, which normally indicated the current floor, went blank. The interior lights remained on. The elevator did not move, and I waited for approximately 10 seconds before pressing the button for the first floor again. The button lit up. The elevator did not respond. I pressed the door open button. The button lit up. The doors did not open. I pressed the alarm button, which was supposed to trigger an audible alarm in the building and to notify the campus security office of an elevator malfunction. The button lit up. I did not hear an alarm in the building, but the building was large enough that I might not have heard one even if it had been triggered. I waited for approximately a minute. The elevator did not move. The display remained blank. I picked up the emergency phone, which was mounted on the wall of the elevator. The phone was supposed to connect directly to a 24-hour emergency response service contracted by the university. I lifted the receiver. Yet there was no dial tone. I held the receiver to my ear and waited. After about 30 seconds, I heard a faint sound on the other end. The sound was not a voice. The sound was something like static, or like the kind of noise you hear when a phone line is connected, but no one is speaking on the other end. I said hello. I identified myself and described my situation. I asked for assistance. The static continued for several more seconds. Then the static stopped. The line was silent. I waited. Nothing happened. After approximately a minute, I hung up the phone. I tried the buttons again. None of them responded. The elevator remained motionless between floors. I took out my personal cell phone, which I carried with me on shift. The phone showed no signal. The basement and the elevator shaft were known to have poor cell reception, and I had not expected the phone to work, but I had hoped. I put the phone back in my pocket. I sat down on the floor of the elevator. I tried to think about what to do. The elevator had been malfunctioning, but the malfunction was not unprecedented. The elevator had been on a maintenance watch list for several months because of intermittent issues with the door sensors. The university had been planning to schedule repairs for the spring semester. I had assumed, based on what facilities had told me in passing, that the issues were minor and would be addressed as part of routine maintenance. I had not expected the elevator to fail completely. I waited. I did not know how long it would be before someone realized I was missing. The next staff member was not scheduled to arrive until 7 a.m., yet the campus security office did random spot checks of buildings during overnight hours, but the spot checks were not predictable, and there was no guarantee that anyone would check the library before morning. I had a book in my hand that I had been retrieving for a student who had submitted a request, and the student would presumably notice if the book did not arrive at the circulation desk. But the student would not know what had happened to me, and the student would not necessarily report my absence to anyone in a useful way. I sat on the floor of the elevator, and I tried to stay calm. I had a bottle of water in my bag. I drank some of it. I considered eating one of the granola bars I kept in my bag for late-night snacks, but I decided to save it in case I was in the elevator for a long time. At approximately 12:58 a.m., by my watch, the elevator began to move. The elevator moved upward. The display remained blank. The elevator did not stop at the first floor, where I had requested. The elevator continued upward, past the first floor, past the second floor, past the third floor, past the fourth floor. The library had 4 floors above ground and 1 basement level. The elevator's maximum upward travel was the 4th floor. There was nothing above the 4th floor. The elevator should not have been able to continue past the 4th floor. The mechanical limits of the elevator shaft would have prevented it. The cables and the counterweights and the safety mechanisms were all designed for a 5-floor building. The elevator continued moving upward. I want to be careful here now because what I'm about to describe is the part of my account that has been most difficult to reconcile with my memory and with the available evidence. I want to be honest about the uncertainty. The elevator moved upward for approximately 40 seconds beyond the point where it should have stopped at the 4th floor. The interior lights remained on. The display remained blank. I did not feel the kind of motion that would have indicated rapid acceleration or deceleration. The elevator simply moved upward at a steady pace, beyond the mechanical limits of the building. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. The space outside the doors was not the 4th floor of the library. The space outside the doors was a hallway that I did not recognize. The hallway was lit by overhead fluorescent fixtures similar to the ones in the basement, but the layout was different from any of the hallways in the library. The walls were painted a pale green color that was not used anywhere in the library, which had been renovated 3 years earlier and was painted in shades of cream and gray throughout. The floor was tiled with small white tiles that were not used anywhere in the library. The hallway extended in both directions for what looked like about 30 feet before turning. There were doors along both sides of the hallway, with numbered plaques next to them. The plaques showed 3-digit numbers that did not correspond to any room numbering system used in the library. I did not get out of the elevator. I stood in the elevator and looked at the hallway and tried to understand what I was seeing. I will tell you what I now believe I was seeing, and although I want to be clear that I did not understand it at the time, I now believe that the elevator had taken me to a floor that does not exist in the library, and that the floor was a place that the building has, by some mechanism I cannot explain, in addition to its standard floors. I do not know whether the floor exists physically, in the sense that it occupies space in the building, or whether the floor exists in some other sense that I am not equipped to describe. I know only that I was looking at a hallway that was not part of the library I had been working in for 6 years. I want to be honest about my reaction. My reaction was to press the button for the 1st floor again. The button lit up. The doors closed. The elevator began to descend. The descent took approximately 25 seconds, which was longer than the descent from the 4th floor to the 1st floor should have taken, but shorter than the descent from a hypothetical higher floor would have suggested. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. I was on the 1st floor of the library, exactly where I had originally been trying to go. I stepped out of the elevator. I walked to the circulation desk. I set the book down on the desk. I looked at the clock on the wall above the desk. The clock showed 1:11 a.m. I had been in the elevator for approximately 30 minutes by the clock's measurement. The elevator had stopped, had moved to a floor that did not exist, had descended, and had returned me to the 1st floor in 30 minutes. The journey should have taken less than a minute under normal circumstances. I tried to think about what to do, and then I did not know whether to report the incident to facilities, to security, or to my supervisor. The incident was unusual enough that I felt I should report it, but the incident was also strange enough that I was not sure how to describe it in a way that would be taken seriously. I had been stuck in a malfunctioning elevator for 30 minutes. The elevator had taken me to a floor that did not exist. The elevator had returned me to the first floor without further incident. The book I had been retrieving was on the desk in front of me. The student who had requested the book had not yet arrived to pick it up. I decided to wait until my shift ended at 7 a.m. and then to file a routine maintenance report about the elevator malfunction. I decided not to mention the floor that did not exist. Yet I decided that mentioning it would not serve any useful purpose and would potentially raise questions about my reliability that I did not want to face. The student, Madeline Forster, did not come to the circulation desk to pick up the book. I waited at the desk for the rest of the shift. The book sat on the counter. At 6:55 a.m., just before my shift ended, I checked the library's online request system to see whether Madeline had canceled the request or had updated her pickup time. The request was no longer in the system. The request had been deleted. There was no record of it. I checked the shift log on the circulation desk computer. I had logged the request at 12:41 a.m. The log entry was still there. The log entry referenced a request number that no longer existed in the system, and I looked up Madeline Forster in the university's student directory, which library staff had access to for the purpose of processing requests. There was no Madeline Forster enrolled at the university. There was no Madeline Forster on the alumni rolls. There was no Madeline Forster in any of the records I had access to. The morning staff arrived. I handed off the shift. I did not mention the elevator. I did not mention the request. I went home. I went to bed. That was the first incident. The second incident occurred 8 days later, on the night of January 30th. I had not, in the intervening week, returned to the elevator under normal circumstances. I had taken the stairs for my building sweeps, citing fatigue and a desire for exercise to anyone who asked. I had been thinking about the first incident constantly, and I had been trying to find an explanation that would let me continue working at the library without being afraid every night. The second incident began with another book request. The request was submitted at 1:14 a.m. The student name on the request was Theodore Lang. The book requested was a 1971 thesis on regional climate patterns in northern Maine. The book was located in the basement closed stacks. The pickup was specified for the overnight shift. I want to tell you what I now believe about these requests, although I did not understand it at the time. I now believe that the requests were not from real students. I believe that the requests were generated by something that had access to the library's online request system, and that the requests were designed to send me to the basement so that I would use the elevator to return to the first floor. I believe that the elevator was the mechanism, and the basement was the destination that would justify my use of the elevator, and the requests were the means of getting me to the basement during overnight hours when there would be no other reason for me to go there. I did not believe any of this on the night of January 30th. On the night of January 30th, I received the request, I logged it, and I considered taking the stairs to the basement. The stairwell to the basement was, as I have described, accessed through a keycard-controlled door. The keycard reader had been installed when the closed stacks had been moved to the basement. And the access was restricted to library staff and to specifically authorized researchers. I could use the stairs to the basement if I wanted to. The stairs were not the standard route, but they were available. I considered using the stairs. I decided not to. I decided that the elevator malfunction on January 22nd had been a one-time occurrence, that the elevator had been operating normally since then, according to the maintenance log, and that there was no reason to assume the malfunction would repeat. I decided to use the elevator and to retrieve the book the standard way. I was wrong. The elevator malfunctioned again. The malfunction was different this time. The elevator descended to the basement normally. I retrieved the book. I got back into the elevator. I pressed the button for the first floor. The elevator began to ascend, and as the elevator stopped between the basement and the first floor, the display went blank. The interior lights remained on. The elevator did not respond to any of the buttons. The phone produced static when I picked it up. My cell phone had no signal. The pattern was the same as January 22nd. The duration was different. The elevator remained stopped for approximately 12 minutes by my watch, which was significantly less than the 30 minutes of the first incident. The elevator then began to ascend. The elevator went past the fourth floor. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. The hallway outside the doors was the same hallway I had seen on January 22nd. The same pale green walls, the same small white tiles, the same numbered doors. The hallway looked exactly as I remembered it. I did not get out of the elevator, and then I pressed the button for the first floor. The doors closed. The elevator descended. The elevator stopped at the first floor. The doors opened. I stepped out. I walked to the circulation desk. I set the book down. The clock above the desk showed 1:47 a.m. The student, Theodore Lang, did not come to pick up the book. The request had been deleted from the system. There was no Theodore Lang in any university directory. The third incident occurred on February 4th. The fourth occurred on February 9th. The fifth occurred on February 14th. The pattern was consistent. A book request would arrive between 12:30 a.m. and 1:30 a.m. The request would specify a book in the basement closed stacks. The student name would be unfamiliar. I would retrieve the book. The elevator would malfunction on the way back up, and the elevator would take me to the impossible floor. I would press the button for the first floor. The elevator would return me to the first floor. The book would sit on the desk. The student would not come. The request would be deleted from the system. I started keeping records. I kept a small notebook at the circulation desk, and I logged each incident as it occurred. I logged the time of the request, the student name, the book title and call number, the duration of the elevator malfunction, and any details about the impossible floor that I could observe from inside the elevator without stepping out. I logged my own observations and reactions. I logged what I had eaten that day, what time I had slept the previous night, and how I had been feeling, in case my own physical or mental state was relevant. I did not show the notebook to anyone, and I kept it in a locked drawer at the circulation desk during my shifts and took it home with me at the end of each shift. I did not tell my supervisor. I did not tell facilities. I did not tell campus security. The fifth incident, on February 14th, was the one where I noticed something different about the impossible floor. The hallway looked the same as it had on the previous occasions, but during the brief window when the doors were open, I noticed that one of the numbered doors along the hallway, the third door on the left, was open. The door had been closed on every previous occasion. I could see, through the open door, into the room beyond. I want to be careful here too. The room beyond the door was small. The room had a single piece of furniture in it, which I would describe as a chair, although the chair was the kind of chair you might see in a dental office or a medical examination room rather than a chair you would have in a regular room. The chair was facing the door. There was no one in the chair. The room was lit by a single overhead fixture. There were no windows that I could see. I stood in the elevator and looked into the room for what was probably about 3 seconds. Then the doors closed. The elevator descended to the first floor. I returned to my shift. I did not log the open door in my notebook that night. I logged it the next morning, after I had gone home and slept and had time to think about it. I logged it because I had decided that the notebook was supposed to be a complete record, and that omitting details because they were unsettling would defeat the purpose. And I logged the open door and the chair and the absence of any person in the chair. The sixth incident did not occur on the schedule I had been tracking. The previous 5 incidents had been spaced 4 to 8 days apart. The sixth incident was supposed to occur, by my projection, on or around February 18th or 19th. The sixth incident did not occur on those dates. The night of February 18th was uneventful. The night of February 19th was uneventful. I did not receive any unusual book requests. The elevator did not malfunction on the limited occasions when I used it for legitimate purposes during the evening hours, before midnight, when other staff were still in the building. I started to think that the incidents had stopped. I started to think that whatever had been happening had run its course. I let myself relax slightly, and I started using the elevator again for routine tasks during my shifts, on the assumption that the malfunctions had been a temporary phase that had ended. The sixth incident occurred on the night of February 27th. The incident was different from the previous 5. On the night of February 27th, I did not receive a book request. I had completed my building sweep at 12:33 a.m. and had returned to the circulation desk. There were no students in the library that night, which was unusual, but not unprecedented for a Tuesday in late February, when midterms had not yet started and the weather had been bad enough to keep most people in their dorms. I sat at the circulation desk and I worked on a paper for one of my master's program courses. The library was quiet. At 1:47 a.m., the elevator chimed. The chime was the standard sound the elevator made when it arrived at a floor. I looked up from my paper. The elevator was at the first floor. The doors were opening. I had not called the elevator. I had not heard anyone in the building. The building sweep had confirmed that the building was empty. Yes, the doors opened fully. The elevator was empty. The interior lights were on. The display showed the first floor. I stood up from the circulation desk. I walked toward the elevator. I stopped about 10 feet from the open doors. I looked into the elevator. The elevator was, by every visible characteristic, an ordinary elevator with its doors open at the first floor. There was nothing unusual about it. The interior was the same beige paneling I had seen hundreds of times. The buttons were unlit. The floor was clean. The doors did not close. The elevator waited. I want to be honest about my reaction. My first reaction was to look around the lobby for anyone who might have called the elevator. The lobby was empty. The main entrance was visible from the circulation desk and had not opened in the past several hours. Yeah, I would have heard the door if it had opened, because the lobby was silent, and the door had a distinctive sound when it was used. No one had entered the lobby. No one was in the lobby other than me. My second reaction was to consider whether the elevator had been called from another floor. I checked the display panel above the doors. The display showed the first floor. The buttons on the call panel outside the elevator were unlit. There was no indication that the elevator had been summoned from anywhere. My third reaction, which took several seconds to develop, was to recognize that the elevator was, by some mechanism, inviting me to enter it. The elevator had opened at the first floor without being called. The elevator was waiting with its doors open. The elevator had been the location of 5 previous incidents in the past 5 weeks. The elevator was, by my best interpretation of the situation, asking me to get in. I did not get in. I stood in the lobby and I watched the elevator. The doors did not close. The elevator did not move. The display continued to show the first floor. I waited for what was probably about 2 minutes. I then walked, slowly, back to the circulation desk. I sat down. I tried to focus on my paper. I could not focus. I kept looking at the elevator. The doors remained open. The elevator remained on the first floor. I waited another 15 minutes. The elevator did not close its doors. The elevator did not move. The lobby was silent except for the faint hum of the building's HVAC system. At approximately 2:05 a.m., I made a decision. I decided to leave the building. I had never left the library during a shift. The library was my responsibility during the overnight hours. Leaving the building would have been a violation of my employment contract and would have been grounds for termination if it had been discovered. The library could not be left unattended. The doors would automatically lock when no staff member was inside, and I had a key card to re-enter. But the building was supposed to have a staff member present at all times during operating hours. I decided to leave anyway. I gathered my coat and my bag. I left the circulation desk. I walked across the lobby to the main entrance. I did not look at the elevator as I walked past it. I went outside. I locked the door behind me. I stood on the steps of the library in the cold February air for a few minutes. I tried to think about what I was going to do. The campus was quiet. Yet the dorms were several hundred yards away across the central quad. The campus security office was in a building on the other side of the quad, about a 5-minute walk. I considered walking to the security office and reporting that the library elevator was malfunctioning. I considered the conversation I would have to have with the overnight security officer. I considered how I would explain that the elevator had opened by itself and had remained open for over 15 minutes without anyone calling it. I considered how the security officer would respond. I considered the possibility that the security officer would walk back to the library with me to inspect the elevator, and that the elevator would be in its normal state by the time we arrived, with the doors closed and the display blank, and that I would have nothing to show the security officer except my own account of what had happened. I decided not to go to security. I decided to walk around the quad for a few minutes and then to return to the library. I decided that if the elevator was still open, with its doors waiting when I returned, I would call my supervisor and report a serious malfunction. I decided that if the elevator was closed and in its normal state, I would attribute the incident to a sensor malfunction and would continue my shift. I walked around the quad. The walk took about 12 minutes. I returned to the library. I unlocked the main entrance. I went inside. The elevator doors were closed. The display showed the first floor. The elevator was, by every visible characteristic, in its normal resting state. I stood in the lobby for a moment. I felt relief, briefly, that the elevator was no longer waiting for me. I then noticed something on the floor of the lobby, near the elevator. I walked over to look at it. There was a small piece of paper on the floor, about 3 feet from the elevator doors. The paper was a standard sheet of library notepad paper, the kind we kept at the circulation desk for student questions and for internal notes. The paper had been folded in half. I picked it up. I unfolded it. The paper had handwriting on it. The handwriting was small and careful. The handwriting was not mine. The handwriting was not familiar to me. The note said, "We have been waiting for you for a long time. The room is ready when you are. Please do not be afraid. The wait has been the difficult part. The arrival is simple." I read the note 3 times. I folded it again, and I put it in my pocket. I went to the circulation desk. I sat down. I tried to think. I had been at the library for the past 15 minutes outside the building. The library had been locked during that time. No one could have entered the library to leave the note. The note had been on the floor when I returned. The note was addressed, by its content, to me. The note referenced waiting and arrival in terms that I associated with the elevator and the impossible floor. I tried to think about who could have written the note. I could not identify any source within the framework of normal explanations. The library had been empty when I had left. The library had been locked while I had been outside. No one had access to the library at that hour, except for the few staff who had key cards. And the staff did not include anyone who would have left a note like this. I considered the possibility that the note had been there before I had left the building, and that I had not noticed it. I tried to remember whether I had walked past that exact spot when I had gone outside. I had walked past the elevator. I had walked across the lobby. I would have walked within a few feet of the spot where the note had been. I would have noticed a folded piece of paper on the floor. I had noticed it when I had returned. The note had not been there when I left. The note had appeared during the 15 minutes I had been outside. The note had been left for me to find. I picked up the satellite phone, which was actually a regular landline phone at the circulation desk. I considered calling someone. I considered calling my supervisor. In it, I considered calling campus security. I considered calling the city police. I put the phone down. I did not call anyone. I did not know what I would say. I reached into my bag. I took out the notebook in which I had been logging the previous incidents. I opened it to a fresh page. I wrote down what had happened. I wrote down the time. I wrote down the elevator opening by itself. I wrote down my decision to leave the building. I wrote down the walk around the quad. I wrote down the note I had found. I copied the text of the note into the notebook. I wrote the words exactly as they appeared on the paper. I noted that the handwriting did not match anyone I knew. I finished the shift. The elevator did not open again that night. I did not receive any more book requests. The building was quiet. I went home in the morning. I slept poorly. I came back for my next shift the following night. I had decided, in the hours between shifts, that I was going to start being more careful. I was going to stop using the elevator entirely. I was going to take the stairs for everything. I was going to file a fake medical accommodation if necessary, to justify my avoidance of the elevator. I want to tell you about the next 2 weeks, because the next 2 weeks are the period during which the situation escalated to the point where I made the decision that has shaped my behavior since. I started taking the stairs exclusively. I filed the medical accommodation. My supervisor accepted it without question. I avoided the elevator. I did not press its buttons. I did not stand near it. I walked around it whenever I had to cross the lobby. I did my building sweeps using the stairs, which added the 12 minutes I mentioned earlier. I retrieved books from the basement using the staff stairwell, which required me to use my key card, but was otherwise straightforward. The elevator did not open by itself again during those 2 weeks. There were no more book requests from non-existent students. The pattern that had been building from January 22nd appeared to have shifted. I did not understand the shift. I assumed it was related to my decision to stop using the elevator. On the night of March 13th, 2 weeks after the night of the open doors and the note, I received a phone call at the circulation desk. The phone rang at 1:18 a.m. The caller ID showed an internal university extension, which suggested the call was coming from another building on campus. I picked up. The voice on the other end was a woman's voice. The voice was older. The voice was calm. The voice said, "Is this the night librarian?" I said yes. The voice said, "My name is Constance Whitbeck. I worked as the night librarian at Hadley Library from 1979 to 1986. I am calling because I have reason to believe that you are experiencing the elevator situation that I experienced during my time at the library. I would like to talk to you about it. Are you willing to speak with me?" I said I was. I asked her how she had gotten my name and number. She said, "I get the names of the night librarians at Hadley from a contact I maintain in the Human Resources Department. I have been calling the night librarians for 38 years. I call when I have reason to believe that the situation has begun. I do not know how I know when it has begun. I have a sense for the timing. As the sense has been accurate in the past." I asked her what she meant by reason to believe. She said, "I have been monitoring the library's online systems from a distance. I have an account that allows me to see certain information about the library's operations, although I am not officially affiliated with the university. I noticed several weeks ago that book requests were being submitted by names that did not correspond to enrolled students. I noticed that the requests were being submitted during overnight hours for books in the basement closed stacks, with pickup time specified for the overnight shift. The pattern was familiar to me. The pattern was the same pattern I observed during my own time as the night librarian. I said I waited several weeks to call you because I wanted to confirm that the pattern was continuing and that you were the person being affected by it. I called tonight because I have not seen any new requests in the past 2 weeks, which suggests that you have stopped using the elevator and that the situation has shifted to the next phase. Have you stopped using the elevator?" I told her I had. She said, "I want to tell you what happened to me. I want to tell you what I did. I want to tell you what I learned. I want to tell you what I would do differently if I had to do it again. I am going to tell you these things in some detail. The conversation will take about 45 minutes. Are you in a position to listen?" I told her I was. The library was empty. The elevator was closed. Yet I had nothing scheduled for the rest of the shift except for the routine 5 a.m. building sweep. I sat at the circulation desk and I listened. Constance told me her story. I am going to give you the parts that mattered, because I am not going to be able to give you the entire 45-minute conversation in the form of a recording without making the recording impossibly long. Constance had been the night librarian at Hadley from 1979 to 1986. She had been 27 years old when she had started. She had been working on a doctoral degree in literature at the time. She had taken the night job for the same reasons I had taken it, which were the steady pay, the quiet hours, and the ability to work on her own studies during her shifts. She had worked at the library for 7 years. The elevator situation had begun in her 3rd year, and in 1981, the pattern had been similar to the pattern I had experienced. Book requests for non-existent students, the elevator malfunctioning during the return trip from the basement, the elevator taking her to a floor that did not exist. She had described the floor to me, and the description had matched my own observations. The pale green walls, the white tiled floor, the numbered doors, the hallway extending in both directions and turning at the ends. Constance had experienced the elevator situation for approximately 4 months in 1981. The frequency had been similar to mine, with incidents every 4 to 8 days. She had also reached the point where the elevator had begun to open by itself at the first floor without being called, inviting her to enter. She had also found a note on the floor of the lobby, and as the note she had found had been similar in content to the note I had found, although the wording had been slightly different. The note she had described had said, "We have been waiting. The room is prepared. Please come when you are ready." Constance had also stopped using the elevator. She had taken the stairs for the rest of her time at the library. She had continued working at the library for 5 years after the situation had begun, until 1986, when she had completed her doctorate and had taken a faculty position at a different university. The elevator situation had continued throughout those 5 years, although in a different form. The elevator had not opened by itself again after the first invitation. The book requests had not resumed in the way they had during the initial 4 months. The situation had become quieter, but it had not gone away entirely. Constance described what the situation had looked like during the years after she had stopped using the elevator. She had observed on multiple occasions the elevator's doors opening briefly, for 1 or 2 seconds, when no one was in the lobby and no one had called the elevator. She had observed, on a few occasions, faint sounds coming from the elevator shaft when she was working at the circulation desk. The sounds had been the kind of sounds she would have associated with someone moving around inside the elevator car, although the elevator car had been visible at the first floor on those occasions, with its doors closed, and there had been no one in the lobby to be making the sounds. She had observed, on one occasion in 1984, it's a piece of paper sliding out from under the elevator doors and onto the lobby floor. She had not picked up the paper. She had used a long stick to push the paper away from the elevator and into a corner of the lobby where she had left it for the morning staff to deal with. The morning staff had reported finding nothing in the corner when they had arrived. The paper had been gone. Constance told me that she believed the elevator situation was tied to the building rather than to any individual person. She believed that the situation had been occurring at the library since some point before her own time as night librarian, and that it had continued after her departure. She had maintained contact with several of the night librarians who had succeeded her, and she had learned that some of them had also experienced the elevator situation, while others had not. The pattern had not been universal. Some night librarians had worked at the library for years without any incidents. Others had experienced incidents within their first few months. Constance did not know what determined whether a particular night librarian would be affected. Constance told me that she had spent the past 38 years researching the building. She had searched the university archives. She had searched the city records. She had searched the historical society. She had been trying to identify what the building had been before it became the library, and what might have happened in the space that the library now occupied that could have produced the elevator situation. She had not been able to find anything definitive. The library building had been constructed in 1962. The land had been purchased by the university in 1958. Before that, the land had been owned by a private family who had operated a small farm on the property from approximately 1880 until 1958. There had been no buildings on the land before the library was built, by any record Constance had been able to find. The land had been farmland. The library had been the first significant structure on the site. Constance had also researched the architect who had designed the library. The architect had been a man named Hollis Vaughan, who had designed several university buildings during the 1960s and who had died in 1971. Vaughan's archives, which Constance had accessed through a contact at the architectural school where Vaughan had taught, contained the original blueprints for the library. The blueprints showed a 4-story building with a basement, exactly as the library existed now. There was no indication of any additional floor in the blueprints. Constance had, however, found something in Vaughan's notes that she considered significant. Vaughan had kept personal notebooks throughout his career, in which he had recorded thoughts and ideas about his various projects. The notebook for the period during which he had designed the Hadley Library contained several entries about the project. Most of the entries were practical, addressing design choices and construction issues. One entry, dated approximately 3 months before construction had begun on the library, was different. The entry said, in Vaughan's handwriting, "I have been asked by someone whose identity I am not at liberty to record here, as it to incorporate into the design of the Hadley Library a feature that is not on the official blueprints and that will not be visible in the completed building. The feature will be located in the elevator shaft. The feature will not interfere with the normal operation of the elevator. The feature will be accessible only under specific conditions that the person asking has explained to me. I do not understand the purpose of the feature. I have agreed to incorporate it because the person asking has provided sufficient compensation and because the feature does not, by their assurances, pose any safety risk to future occupants of the building. I am noting the existence of the feature here so that, if the building is ever significantly renovated and the elevator shaft is ever fully exposed, the feature may be discovered and may be either preserved or removed at the discretion of whoever is in charge of the renovation. I do not expect this to occur during my lifetime. I am noting it for the future. Constance read the entry to me from a photocopy she had made of the notebook page. She had been carrying the photocopy for 35 years. I asked her whether she had any idea who had asked Vaughn to incorporate the feature. She said, "I have spent 35 years trying to find out. I have not been able to determine the identity. Vaughn's notebook does not contain any other references to the person. The university's archives from the period contain no references to any unauthorized additions to the building. The construction company that built the library is no longer in operation, and I have not been able to access their records. The compensation Vaughn mentioned is not visible in his financial records, which suggests it was paid in some form that was not documented. I have a theory about the identity of the person, but the theory is speculative, and I am not going to share it on the phone because I am concerned that the phone may not be entirely private. I have not been entirely sure about the privacy of my communications for the past 35 years. I asked her what she would advise me to do. She said, "I would advise you to continue avoiding the elevator. I would advise you to file your medical accommodation in a way that is robust enough to survive scrutiny if the university's facilities department ever questions it. I would advise you to develop a routine that does not require you to use the elevator under any circumstances. I would advise you to be patient. The situation, by my experience, will become quieter if you avoid the elevator consistently. The situation will not, by my experience, go away entirely. The situation will continue, in some form, for as long as you work at the library." She continued, "I would also advise you not to do what I did, which was to spend 35 years researching the situation in the hope of understanding it. The research has not produced any actionable understanding. The research has consumed a significant portion of my adult life. The research has not made me feel safer. The research has only kept me connected to the situation in ways that I now think were not healthy for me. If I had to do it again, and I would have left the situation alone after I left the night librarian position, I would have tried to forget about it. I am telling you this because I do not want you to make the same choice I made." I asked her about the new librarians who had succeeded her. I asked her how she had gotten in touch with them. I asked her whether any of them had wanted her advice. She said, "Most of them did not want my advice. Most of them dismissed my call. A few of them listened. A smaller number of them engaged with me afterward. 2 of them maintained ongoing contact with me for years. Both of them have since died. One died of natural causes at 68. The other died in a car accident at 42. I do not know whether either death was related to the situation. I have wondered about it. I have not been able to determine anything. I asked her whether she would mind if I called her again with follow-up questions. She said, "I would not mind. You can call me any time. I will give you my home number. I do not have a cell phone. I have decided, over the years, that I prefer not to be reached easily. I am usually home in the evenings. I am usually awake until midnight. She gave me her home number. I wrote it down in my notebook. We talked for a few more minutes about practical matters. She asked me whether I was planning to leave the night librarian position. I told her I was not, that I needed the job and the benefits. She told me she understood. She said she had also needed the job when she had been in her 20s. She said she had stayed for 7 years and had only left when she had been ready to leave for other reasons. She said she did not regret staying. We hung up. I sat at the circulation desk for the rest of the shift. The elevator did not open. There were no book requests. The night was quiet. I went home in the morning. I slept poorly. I came back the next night. I followed Constance's advice. I continued avoiding the elevator. I maintained my medical accommodation. I developed a routine that allowed me to do my job without using the elevator. The situation became quieter, exactly as Constance had said it would. The elevator did not open by itself again during the spring or summer of that year. There were no more book requests from non-existent students. The library went back to being, by every observable measure, a normal library with a quiet overnight shift. In late February of this year, the elevator was taken out of service for the mechanical issues that had been documented in the maintenance log. I was relieved when the elevator was taken out of service because it meant I no longer had to think about it as an active possibility during my shifts. The elevator was sealed off. The doors were locked. The maintenance crew put up signs indicating that the elevator was out of service and directing users to the stairs. I continued to take the stairs, the way I had been doing for over a year. The presence of the out-of-service signs gave me a kind of cover. I no longer had to justify my avoidance of the elevator with reference to my medical accommodation. The elevator was simply not available to anyone. The elevator was out of service for 14 months. During those 14 months, I worked the night shift at the library without any incidents related to the elevator situation. I focused on my master's degree. I made progress on my thesis. I had some good months. I started to think that the situation was over, that whatever had been happening in 1981 and again in the previous year had run its course, and that the library was no longer the location of anything I needed to be afraid of. The elevator was returned to service 3 weeks ago. I have not used it. I have continued to take the stairs. My supervisor has not pushed back on my continued accommodation. The other staff have noticed that I do not use the elevator, but no one has commented on it directly. I have been thinking, for the past 3 weeks, about whether I should test the elevator. I have been thinking about whether the situation has actually ended, in the sense that the elevator is now a normal elevator that no longer has whatever feature Vaughn was asked to incorporate, or whether the situation is dormant in the sense that the elevator still has the feature, but the feature has not been activated recently. I have been thinking about whether the 14 months of being out of service have changed the elevator in some way, either by interrupting whatever connection the elevator had to the impossible floor, or by giving the impossible floor time to prepare for something new. I have been thinking about whether I should call Constance again. I have not called her since our initial conversation 13 months ago. I have her number. I have been hesitant to call because I do not want to drag her back into a situation she has been trying to leave behind for 38 years. I have been hesitant because I do not have a specific question to ask her. I have only the general anxiety about whether to test the elevator, and Constance has already told me in our first conversation what she would advise about testing the elevator. She would advise against it. I have decided to call her tonight. I am going to call her after I finish recording this. The reason I am going to call her is not to ask for advice about whether to use the elevator. The reason I am going to call her is something else. I want to tell you what the something else is, because it is the part of the story that I have not told anyone, and the part that has made me decide to record this account. 3 nights ago, on the second night after the elevator was returned to service, I was at the circulation desk. The library was empty. The time was approximately 2:14 a.m. I was working on a chapter of my thesis. The lobby was silent. The elevator chimed. I looked up. The doors opened. The elevator was empty. The interior lights were on. The display showed the first floor. I had not called the elevator. I had not used the elevator since it had been returned to service. I had not been near it. The elevator had opened by itself, exactly the way it had opened on the night of February 27th of the previous year. I did not get up from the desk. I sat and watched the elevator. The doors remained open. The elevator did not move. After about a minute, I noticed something on the floor of the elevator car. I had not noticed it immediately because the lighting in the elevator made the floor look uniformly beige. The thing on the floor was a small object about the size of a wallet, dark in color. I did not get up. I did not approach the elevator. I sat at the desk and watched the object. The doors began to close. They closed slowly, more slowly than the elevator's normal door closing speed. They closed all the way. The display continued to show the first floor. I waited at the desk for the rest of the shift. The elevator did not open again. The library was quiet. I went home in the morning. I have not been back to look at the elevator floor. I do not know whether the object is still in the elevator. I do not know what the object was. I have a guess. I am not going to share my guess on this recording. I am going to call Constance tonight. I am going to tell her about the chime and the open doors and the object on the floor. I am going to ask her what she thinks I should do. I am also going to ask her something else. I am going to ask her whether, in her 38 years of contact with the night librarians at Hadley, any of them ever found objects in the elevator after the elevator opened by itself. I am going to ask her whether she has any record of what those objects were. I am going to ask her whether the objects were always small and dark and approximately wallet-sized, or whether they varied. Yet I am going to ask her whether anyone has ever picked up one of the objects and examined it. I have a feeling that I already know the answer to some of those questions, based on what Constance told me in our first conversation about the paper that slid out from under the elevator doors in 1984. I have a feeling that the elevator has been depositing things in the library for a long time, and that the things have been removed by whoever was working when the things appeared, or that the things have been left for the morning staff to dispose of, or that the things have been ignored long enough that they have, in some way, retracted themselves back into the elevator. I am going to call Constance. I am going to make notes about what she tells me. I am going to add the notes to my notebook. I am going to continue this recording in a few days, and after I have spoken with Constance and have had time to think about what she tells me. I want to give her the opportunity to inform what I record next, rather than recording everything tonight based only on what I currently know. I am going to stop recording for now. The library is quiet. The elevator is closed. The display shows the first floor. The object, if it is still in the elevator, is still in the elevator. I am going to finish my shift. I am going to call Constance from my apartment in the morning after I have slept. I will return to this recording within the next few days. I called Constance the morning after I finished the previous part of this recording. I called her at 10 a.m. which was earlier than I would have preferred to call someone who had told me she was usually awake until midnight, but I had not slept well, and I did not want to wait until evening. The phone rang 4 times. A man answered. The man identified himself as Constance's son. His name was Daniel. He sounded like he was in his 50s. He told me that Constance had passed away in October of last year. He said she had died of pancreatic cancer that had been diagnosed in August and that had progressed quickly. He said the funeral had been small. He said he was sorry to be telling me this if I had been a friend of his mother's. I told him I had spoken with Constance once, 13 months earlier, yet in connection with my work at the library where she had also worked decades before. I told him I had been calling to follow up on that conversation. I told him I was sorry for his loss. Daniel was quiet for a moment. He said, "You're a night librarian at Hadley?" I told him I was. He said, "My mother told me about her work at Hadley once, in detail, about 3 weeks before she died. She had been keeping the details to herself for 38 years. She told me about an elevator situation. She told me she had been calling the night librarians at the library for decades to warn them about it. She told me she had a photocopy of a notebook page from the architect who had designed the building. She gave me the photocopy and a folder of other materials related to her research. She asked me to keep the folder safe. She told me that if any of the night librarians she had been in contact with ever called her after she died, I should give the folder to them. She said the folder might be useful to someone who was still in the situation. I asked him whether he had the folder. He said, "I have it. It is in my house. I have not opened it." My mother asked me not to. She told me the contents were not for me. She told me they were for the next night librarian who needed them. I have respected her request. I would be willing to send the folder to you if you can confirm that you are the person my mother was in contact with. Do you have any documentation of your conversation with her? I told him I had a notebook in which I had logged the conversation. I told him I could quote things she had said to me, including details from her own research that she had described, as that would not be available to anyone who had not spoken with her directly. I quoted the entry from Hollis Vaughn's notebook, which Constance had read to me in our conversation. I quoted the section about the feature that Vaughn had been asked to incorporate into the elevator shaft. Daniel was quiet for a long moment after I finished quoting. He said, "That matches what my mother told me. I am satisfied. I will send you the folder. Can you give me your address?" I gave him my address. He told me he would mail the folder that day. He told me to call him when I received it. He gave me his phone number. We talked for a few more minutes about his mother. He told me she had been a thoughtful person who had taken her work seriously and who had been, in his view, somewhat consumed by the elevator situation in ways that had affected her relationships throughout her life. He told me he had wished, in retrospect, that she had been able to let go of it. He told me he hoped that whoever received the folder would be able to find some kind of resolution that his mother had not been able to find. I told him I would try. I thanked him for the call. We hung up. I want to tell you what arrived in the folder. The folder arrived 4 days later, on a Thursday. The folder was a manila folder, about an inch thick, sealed with tape. I opened it on the kitchen table in my apartment. I went through the contents item by item. I want to describe the contents in some detail because the contents are the part of the story that I have been most reluctant to share, mine and the part that has shaped my understanding of the situation in ways that I am still processing. The first item in the folder was the photocopy Constance had described of the page from Hollis Vaughn's notebook. The photocopy was of an aged document with handwriting that matched what Constance had quoted to me. The text was as she had recited it. The second item was a typewritten document, about 12 pages long, that appeared to be Constance's own summary of her research over the decades. The document was undated but referenced events as recent as 2019, which suggested it had been updated periodically. The document covered the history of the library, the architectural research Constance had done, her interviews with subsequent night librarians, and her own theories about the situation. Most of the content was material she had described to me on the phone. Some of the content was new. The new content included a section about the previous owners of the land. Constance had identified the family that had owned the property before the university had purchased it in 1958. The family was named Brennan. The Brennans had operated a small farm on the land from 1880 until 1958. The farm had been a modest operation. The family had grown vegetables and raised some livestock and had supplied a small portion of the local food market in the town. Constance had researched the family's history. She had identified that the family had owned the land continuously across 4 generations. The last owner, a man named Walter Brennan, and had sold the land to the university in 1958 because he was the last surviving member of the family and he had no children to inherit the property. Constance had visited Walter Brennan in 1985. He had been in his 80s at the time. He had been living in a small apartment in the town, having used the proceeds of the land sale to support himself in retirement. Constance had introduced herself as a researcher interested in the history of the land that was now occupied by the library. She had not told him about the elevator situation. She had asked him about the family history and about the use of the land during the time the Brennans had owned it. Walter had told her about the farm. He had told her about his childhood there. He had told her about his parents and his grandparents. He had told her about the daily routines of the farm. Said he had told her about the buildings the family had constructed on the land over the decades, which had included the Maine farmhouse, a barn, a small chicken coop, a tool shed, and a root cellar. Constance had made a careful note of the location of the root cellar. The root cellar had been a small underground structure used by the family to store vegetables and other foods that needed to be kept cool. Walter had described the location of the root cellar in terms that allowed Constance to compare it to the layout of the library, which had been built on the same land 7 years earlier. Constance had concluded, based on Walter's description, that the root cellar had been located approximately where the library's elevator shaft was now located. Though Constance had asked Walter what had happened to the root cellar when the land had been sold to the university. Walter had told her that the structures on the land had been demolished by the university's construction crew before the library had been built. He had told her that the demolition had included the root cellar. He had told her that the root cellar had been filled in with earth before the foundation of the library had been poured. Constance had asked Walter whether anything had been buried in the root cellar before it had been filled in. Walter had told her no. He had told her the root cellar had been emptied of all stored food before the demolition had begun, and that nothing had been left in it. He had told her this in a tone that Constance had described in her notes as perhaps too quick, as if he had been prepared for the question. Constance had not pressed Walter further. She had thanked him for his time and had left. Walter had died in 1987, 2 years after the interview. Constance had attended his funeral. She had observed that Walter had no surviving family present at the funeral, only a few neighbors and the priest from the local Catholic church. The third item in the folder was a set of photocopies of newspaper articles from the local newspaper dated between 1880 and 1958, the period of the Brennan family's ownership of the land. The articles were highlighted in places. Constance had marked several articles that referenced the Brennan family. Most of the articles were ordinary, covering things like crop reports, marriages, births, and deaths within the family. A few of the articles were more substantial. Yet one of the articles, dated 1903, reported that Patrick Brennan, the patriarch of the family at the time, had died of an apparent heart attack while working in the root cellar on his property. The article described Patrick as a respected member of the local farming community. The article noted that the body had been discovered by his son, James Brennan, who was the next generation owner of the farm. The article did not include any unusual details about the death. Another article, dated 1924, reported that James Brennan's wife, Mary Brennan, had died after a brief illness. The article noted that Mary had been unable to be moved from the root cellar in her final hours, where she had reportedly been resting because the heat of the summer had been too much for her in the main house. Yet the article noted that Mary had died in the root cellar with her husband and children present. The article did not include any unusual details. A third article, dated 1947, reported that James Brennan's son, Thomas Brennan, who had been the next generation owner of the farm after James, had died in a farm accident. The article described the accident as having occurred when Thomas had been working in the root cellar and had suffered a fall. The article noted that the body had been discovered by his son, Walter Brennan, who would later sell the property to the university. The article did not include any unusual details. Constance had highlighted, in pencil, the references to the root cellar in each of the three articles. She had written a note in the margin of the third article that said, 3 deaths across 3 generations. All in the same location. The location was filled in before the library was built. The library was built with an elevator shaft directly above the location. Walter was the only Brennan who did not die in the root cellar. He sold the land and lived another 29 years. The fourth item in the folder was a brief handwritten note from Constance, undated, that appeared to be addressed to whoever would eventually receive the folder. The note said, "I have not been able to determine what was in the root cellar. I have not been able to determine what the Brennans were doing in it. I have considered the possibility that the family was operating some kind of private religious or cultural practice in the root cellar that involved successive generations. But I have considered the possibility that the deaths were not accidents and that they were related to whatever was being done in the root cellar. I have considered the possibility that Walter survived because he refused to participate in whatever the family had been doing. I have not been able to verify any of these possibilities. The records I have access to do not provide answers. I am leaving you my research in the hope that you may be able to make use of it. I have come to believe that the impossible floor in the elevator is connected to the root cellar in some way I do not understand. I have come to believe that the floor is, in some sense, what remained of the root cellar after the cellar was filled in and the library was built over it. I have come to believe that the architect Vaughn was asked to incorporate the feature in the elevator shaft by someone who knew about the connection and who wanted to preserve the access. I have not been able to identify who that person was. I suspect, but cannot prove, that the person was connected to the Brennan family, or to whatever the family had been doing in the root cellar. I am sorry I cannot give you more. I have done what I could. The decision about what to do with the information is yours. The fifth item in the folder was a small key. The key was an old brass key, the kind that would fit into a tumbler lock from the early 20th century. The key was attached to a paper tag with handwriting on it. The handwriting was Constance's. The tag said, "This key was given to me by Walter Brennan during my interview in 1985. He told me it was a key to his family home, which had been demolished decades earlier. He asked me to keep it safe. He told me he did not want it to be lost. He did not explain why he was giving it to me rather than keeping it himself. I have kept it for 38 years. I do not know what it opens. I am leaving it for you because Walter wanted it to be kept safe by someone, and because I have not been able to keep it safe for much longer. Please decide what to do with it." The sixth item in the folder was a small photograph. The photograph was a black and white image, about 3 inches by 5 inches, mounted on a piece of cardstock. The photograph showed a small underground room with stone walls and a packed dirt floor. The room had wooden shelves along the walls, and the shelves were partially stocked with what looked like glass jars of preserves and burlap sacks of root vegetables. The room had a single wooden door visible in the frame. The room was illuminated by what appeared to be a single oil lamp hanging from a hook in the ceiling. In the center of the room, on the floor, was a small wooden chair. The chair was facing the door. The chair was empty. The chair was identical, by every visible characteristic, to the chair I had seen through the open door on the impossible floor on the night of February 14th of the previous year. There was no caption on the photograph. There was no date written on the back. The photograph was simply included in the folder, between the handwritten note and a few additional pages of newspaper clippings. I sat at my kitchen table and I looked at the photograph for a long time. I tried to think about what it meant. The photograph showed the root cellar of the Brennan farm, presumably from some time before the property had been sold to the university in 1958. The photograph showed a chair that I had seen, decades later, in a hallway that did not exist in a building that had been built on top of the location where the root cellar had been. The chair in the photograph was the same chair I had seen in the impossible floor. I do not know how the chair could have been the same chair. I do not know how a piece of furniture from a demolished structure could have been visible in a hallway that, by every reasonable measure, did not exist as a physical space. I do not have an explanation. I am noting the observation. I put the photograph back in the folder. I put the folder in a locked drawer in my desk. I went to the library that night for my shift. I did not use the elevator. The library was quiet. The elevator did not open by itself. The night passed without incident. I want to tell you what I have done in the weeks since I received the folder, because the weeks have involved decisions that I am still in the process of making. I have not opened the elevator with the key from the folder. I have considered it. The key Walter Brennan gave to Constance is, by my best guess, a key to the original root cellar door. The root cellar was demolished in 1958. The root cellar door no longer exists in any physical form by any record I have been able to find. The key cannot, in any practical sense, open anything that currently exists. I have considered the possibility that the key might open something on the impossible floor, if the impossible floor is in some sense the preserved remnant of the root cellar. I have considered taking the key into the elevator and going to the impossible floor and trying the key in one of the numbered doors. I have not done this. I have not been willing to enter the elevator at all, with or without the key, and the considerations that have kept me out of the elevator for the past 15 months have continued to outweigh my curiosity about what the key might open. I have continued to take the stairs. I have continued to maintain my medical accommodation. I have continued to do my job in a way that does not require the elevator. The elevator has opened by itself 2 more times in the past 3 weeks, and in addition to the time I described in the previous part. The 2 additional openings occurred on the night of 3 days ago and the night of yesterday. Both openings followed the same pattern. The elevator chimed at approximately 2 in the morning. The doors opened. The elevator was empty. I sat at the circulation desk and watched. The doors remained open for between 1 and 2 minutes. The doors closed. The elevator returned to its closed state. On the night of 3 days ago, after the doors closed, I noticed a small object on the floor of the lobby, about 3 feet from the elevator. The object was a piece of paper folded in half. I did not pick it up immediately. I waited about an hour. The object remained on the floor. I eventually walked over to it. I picked it up. I unfolded it. The paper had handwriting on it. The handwriting was the same handwriting as the note I had found on the night of February 27th of the previous year. The new note said, "We have been waiting longer than expected. The room is still ready. The arrival is still simple. We can wait. We have always waited. Please consider that the waiting is also a cost to us, and that we would prefer not to wait indefinitely." I read the note 3 times. I folded it. I put it in my pocket. I added it to the notebook in which I had been logging the incidents. I logged the date and time of the elevator opening, the duration the doors had remained open, the time at which I had picked up the note, and the full text of the note. On the night of yesterday, after the elevator opened and closed, I did not find any object on the floor. I checked the lobby carefully. There was nothing. And I want to tell you about the decision I have been making, because the decision has reached a point where I have, in some sense, committed to it, even though I have not yet acted on it. I have decided to write a letter to my supervisor. The letter will describe the situation in a moderate amount of detail. The letter will not describe the impossible floor, or the chair, or the notes, or the other elements that would, by Constance's experience and by my own assessment, be likely to result in my being dismissed as unreliable or unwell. The letter will describe a more limited version of the situation. The letter will say that the elevator has been malfunctioning since it was returned to service, that it has been opening by itself on multiple occasions during my overnight shifts, that I have been finding small objects in the lobby after the openings that I cannot account for, and that I am concerned about the safety and security implications of these incidents. The letter will request that the elevator be inspected by an outside vendor, separate from the university's facilities department, to determine whether there is a mechanical or electrical issue that has not been addressed by the previous repairs. The letter will not request that I be relieved of my duties or that the night shift be staffed by additional personnel. The letter will simply request the inspection. I have decided to write the letter because I have come to believe that the situation needs some kind of formal acknowledgement in the institutional record. I have been the only person, as far as I know, who has been observing the situation since the elevator was returned to service. The previous repairs were apparently insufficient to address whatever is causing the elevator to open by itself. The university's facilities department has not been informed of the openings because I have not reported them. Reporting them now will create a record that, if the situation continues or escalates, will be available for whoever has to deal with it next. I have also decided to write the letter because I have come to believe that I am not, in the long term, going to be able to manage the situation alone. I am 36 years old. I am working on a master's degree that will take me another 2 years to complete. I do not want to spend the next 2 years, and however many years after that I might continue working at the library, alone in the building during the overnight hours, watching an elevator that opens by itself and that wants me to enter it. The pattern of the incidents has been escalating since the elevator was returned to service. The frequency has increased from approximately every 6 weeks to approximately every 10 days. The notes have become more direct. The weighting that the notes reference has, by the language of the most recent note, become a cost that the entity behind the situation is unwilling to bear indefinitely. I have come to believe that the situation will not, contrary to Constance's experience in the years after she stopped using the elevator, simply become quieter if I continue to avoid it. I have come to believe that the situation is moving towards some kind of resolution, and that the resolution will involve either my entering the elevator or my being unable to continue to avoid it. I have decided to write the letter as a way of beginning to share the situation with people other than myself. I have decided to write it knowing that the letter will probably not produce the inspection I am requesting, and that the facilities department will probably attribute the openings to a sensor malfunction that has not been adequately diagnosed. I have decided to write it because the act of writing it will create a record that, even if it does not produce useful action, will at least exist as documentation that the situation was occurring, and that I was aware of it, and that I was trying to do something about it. I have not yet sent the letter. I drafted it 3 nights ago, after the second opening. Yet I have been revising it in my apartment between shifts. I expect to send it within the next week. I want to tell you what I have decided not to do, because the decisions of what not to do are also part of my reasoning. I have decided not to enter the elevator under any circumstances. I have decided not to test the impossible floor by going to it intentionally. I have decided not to use the key to attempt to open any door I might encounter on the impossible floor. I have decided not to investigate the root cellar's location in any way that would involve entering the elevator shaft or accessing any space that is physically below the library that might correspond to where the root cellar used to be. I have decided not to share the folder of materials Constance left for me with anyone outside myself. Yet I have considered sharing it with my supervisor as part of the letter. I have decided against this. The folder includes materials that would, in my judgment, make the situation seem less credible rather than more credible to anyone reading them. The newspaper clippings about the Brennan family deaths, the photograph of the root cellar with the chair that matches the chair on the impossible floor, the key from a structure that was demolished 66 years ago, are the kinds of materials that would, by my best assessment, undermine my credibility if I included them in any formal report. I have decided to keep the folder as my own private resource, separate from anything I share with the university. I have decided not to call Daniel Brennan again, except to thank him for sending the folder, which I have already done by phone. And I have decided not to try to find any other living members of the Brennan family, although I have done some preliminary research and have determined that there are some distant relatives still living in the area. I have decided that contacting them would not be productive and would risk drawing attention to the situation in ways that I do not want to risk. I have decided not to investigate the impossible floor's history beyond what Constance had already done. I have decided that her 38 years of research did not produce useful answers, and that my own additional research is unlikely to produce answers that hers did not. I have decided not to leave the night librarian position. I have considered leaving. I have considered finding a different job, even at lower pay, that would not require me to be alone in the library at night. And I have considered moving to a different city. I have decided not to do these things because I do not have a strong alternative employment option, because the tuition remission is essential to my completing my master's degree, and because Constance's experience suggested that the situation does not necessarily follow people who leave it. The situation has remained at the library for at least 60 years. The night librarians who have left the position have not, by Constance's accounts, continued to be affected by the situation after they left. I have come to believe that the situation is tied to the building rather than to me, and that leaving the building would, by reasonable expectation, end my involvement in it. I have decided not to leave because I do not yet need to leave. Yeah, but the situation has not yet reached the point where my safety or my well-being requires me to leave. I am still able to do my job. I am still able to manage the elevator's openings by avoiding them. The situation may reach the point where leaving becomes necessary. I have not reached that point. I am willing to wait until I reach it before I act on it. I want to tell you, finally, about the most recent thing that has happened, because it is the thing that has prompted me to record this final part of the story tonight, rather than waiting longer. 3 hours ago, I was at the circulation desk. The library was empty. The time was approximately 11:47 p.m. I had just begun my shift. I was setting up my work for the night, preparing the circulation desk for the overnight hours. I had not yet done my building sweep, yet the phone at the circulation desk rang. The caller ID showed an internal university extension. I did not recognize the extension number. I picked up. The voice on the other end was a woman's voice. The voice was older. The voice was familiar, although I could not immediately place it. The voice said, "Is this the night librarian?" I said yes. The voice said, "My name is Constance Whitbeck. I worked as the night librarian at Hadley Library from 1979 to 1986. I am calling because I have reason to believe that you are experiencing the elevator situation that I experienced during my time at the library. I would like to talk to you about it. Are you willing to speak with me?" The wording was identical to the wording Constance had used when she had called me 13 months earlier. The voice was identical. The cadence was identical. I sat at the circulation desk, and I held the phone to my ear, and I tried to think about what was happening. Constance had died in October of last year. I had spoken with her son Daniel 2 weeks ago. The voice on the phone could not be Constance's voice by any reasonable explanation. I did not respond to the voice. I held the phone and I listened. The voice continued speaking. The voice said the same things Constance had said in our first conversation. The voice described the elevator situation. The voice told me about her own experience as the night librarian. The voice referenced the same dates, the same patterns, the same details. The voice was reciting, with what I would describe as exact fidelity, the conversation Constance and I had had 13 months earlier. I let the voice continue for several minutes. And the voice did not respond to the fact that I was not speaking. The voice did not pause for my responses the way Constance had paused during our actual conversation. The voice was speaking the conversation as a single continuous monologue, including the parts where I would have been speaking, with my words spoken in Constance's voice in the same cadence as her own words. I hung up the phone. I sat at the circulation desk. The phone did not ring again. I waited for a few minutes. I tried to think. The call had come from an internal university extension. I checked the caller ID log on the phone. The call had originated from an extension number that I did not recognize. I looked up the extension number in the campus directory, which the library had a copy of at the circulation desk. The extension number did not correspond to any office on campus. The extension number was not assigned. I want to be careful about what I am claiming. I am claiming that I received a phone call from an unassigned extension number, in which a voice that sounded identical to Constance's voice recited our previous conversation. I am claiming that the voice did not pause for my responses, and that the voice spoke my words in Constance's cadence. I am claiming that Constance is dead by the testimony of her son and by my own subsequent verification through public death records, and that the call could not have been from her in any conventional sense. I am not claiming any specific explanation for the call. I am noting it. After the call, I did my building sweep using the stairs. The sweep was uneventful. I returned to the circulation desk. I sat down. I opened the notebook in which I have been documenting the situation. I wrote down the call. I wrote down the time, the caller ID information, the content of the voice's monologue, as I could remember it, and my response. I have decided to record this part of the story tonight because the call has changed my assessment of the situation. The situation has, until tonight, been confined to the elevator and to the immediate area around the elevator in the library lobby. The situation has now extended to the phone system. The situation is using a voice that I associate with someone who tried to help me, in a way that is, by every reasonable interpretation, an attempt to invoke my trust in that person. The situation is, by my current understanding, becoming more sophisticated in its methods. I do not know what to make of the call. I do not know what the situation wants from me beyond what I have already understood, which is that it wants me to enter the elevator. I do not know whether the call was meant to encourage me to enter the elevator, or to discourage me from sending the letter to my supervisor, or to do something else entirely. I do not have the framework to interpret the call. I have decided, in the hours since the call, that I am going to send the letter to my supervisor tomorrow. I have decided that the call has confirmed that the situation is escalating in ways I cannot manage alone, and that beginning to share the situation with the institution is now necessary rather than merely advisable. I expect that the letter will not produce any useful response from the facilities department, and I expect that the situation will continue regardless of what the institution does. I expect that I will need to make further decisions in the coming weeks about whether to leave the position, despite my earlier decision not to leave. I am going to stop recording for tonight. The library is quiet. The elevator is closed. The phone has not rung again. I am going to finish my shift. I am going to send the letter in the morning. I will record one more part of this story after I have done so, to document whatever response I receive and whatever further events occur. I sent the letter on a Wednesday morning 3 weeks ago. I sent it by email to my direct supervisor, with a copy to the head of facilities and a copy to the library's director. I had decided that copying multiple recipients would make the letter harder to dismiss as a private concern that could be handled informally between my supervisor and me. The letter was approximately 400 words long. It described the elevator's behavior in measured language. It requested an inspection by an outside vendor. It noted that I had been documenting the incidents in a personal log, and that the log was available for review if needed. It did not mention the impossible floor, the notes, the chair, the photograph, the key, the call from the voice that sounded like Constance, or any of the other elements that would have been likely to undermine my credibility. I received an automated acknowledgement from each of the 3 recipients within an hour. I received a personal response from my supervisor, Karen, that afternoon. The response was brief. It said she had read the letter, that she took my concerns seriously, that she would discuss the matter with facilities and would get back to me within the week. She did not include any specific questions or requests for additional information. I received nothing from the head of facilities or from the library's director. Karen called me into her office on Friday afternoon, 2 days after the letter. I was not on shift, but I came in for the meeting. Karen's office was on the 2nd floor of the library, near the administrative offices. The office was small and tidy, with a window that looked out onto the central quad. Karen was in her early 60s. She had been the director of library operations for about 12 years. She had hired me into the night librarian position 6 years earlier. We had a professional but cordial relationship. I respected her. I believe she respected me. Karen had me sit down. She closed the office door. She told me she had spoken with facilities about the elevator. She told me facilities had reviewed the maintenance logs since the elevator had been returned to service, and had found no record of any malfunctions or unusual events. She told me facilities had asked, reasonably, why I had not reported the incidents through the normal maintenance reporting system at the time they had occurred, rather than waiting to send a comprehensive letter weeks after the incidents had begun. I told her I had been hoping the incidents would resolve themselves. I told her I had been reluctant to file maintenance reports for incidents that I could not prove had occurred, given that the elevator was unoccupied during the openings and that there was no physical evidence of the openings other than my own observation. I told her I had decided to send the letter when the incidents had continued and had increased in frequency. Karen was quiet for a moment. She said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly. I am not asking in any official capacity. I am asking as a person who has known you for 6 years and who has worked with you and who considers you a colleague. Are you all right?" I told her I was. I told her I had been working a difficult schedule for 6 years and that I had been dealing with the demands of my graduate program on top of the schedule, but that I was managing. I told her I was not unwell. I told her I was not imagining things. I told her I was reporting what I had observed in good faith. Karen nodded. She said, "I believe you. I want you to know that. I also want to be honest with you about what is going to happen with the letter. Facilities is not going to authorize an outside inspection. The cost of an outside inspection is significant, and the elevator is currently passing all of the routine maintenance checks. Without physical evidence of the malfunctions you have described, facilities does not have a basis for the inspection. I am going to push back on this in the next few weeks, but I do not expect to succeed. And the most likely outcome is that facilities will agree to install a video camera in the elevator that records continuously so that any future incidents will be captured on video. The video would provide the evidence that facilities is currently lacking. I will recommend this approach in my next conversation with facilities. I think they will agree to it because the cost is modest and because it addresses the documentation gap that they are concerned about." She continued, "I want to also tell you that I am going to be honest with you about something else. There have been previous reports about the elevator from previous night librarians. The reports go back, by my access to the personnel files, at least to the 1990s. The reports have been inconsistent in their content. Some of them have described mechanical malfunctions of the kind you have described. Others have described things that I will not characterize because I do not want to influence your own observations. The reports have generally been handled the same way I am handling yours, which is that facilities reviews them, finds no evidence to support them, and closes them without action. The elevator has been replaced once during my time at the library in 2008, after a particularly persistent series of reports from the night librarian at that time. The replacement elevator did not change the pattern of reports. The reports continued at approximately the same frequency they had been occurring before the replacement. I asked her how many reports there had been over the years. She said, "I do not have an exact count. I have reviewed the files at various points. The reports cluster around certain periods. There were several in the early 1990s. There were several in the late 1990s. There was a significant cluster in 2007 and 2008, which led to the elevator replacement. There was a smaller cluster in 2013 and 2014. There was another small cluster 2 years ago when the previous night librarian before you, Jonathan, was in the position briefly. I do not know whether you are aware that Jonathan left the position quickly. He worked here for about 3 months. He resigned without giving a detailed reason. He filed 2 reports about the elevator during his 3 months. The reports were not specific about what he had observed. He simply requested that he be reassigned to a different shift, and when no different shift was available, he resigned. I asked her whether she had ever experienced anything unusual at the library herself. She said, "I have not. I have never worked an overnight shift here. I have always been a day staff member. I have been in the library at various odd hours, including evenings and early mornings, and I have not observed anything that I would describe as unusual." I am not telling you this to suggest that the unusual events you have described did not occur. I am telling you because you asked, and because I want to be honest with you about my own experience, which has not included any direct observation of the kind of phenomena that the night librarians have reported over the years. My understanding of the situation is based entirely on the reports of others. I have come to trust those reports as sincere descriptions of what the night librarians believe they have observed. I do not have a personal framework for interpreting them beyond that. I asked her what she thought I should do. She said, "I think you should continue documenting what you observe. I think you should continue using the stairs. I think you should let me push for the video camera installation, which will take some weeks to arrange. I think you should consider whether the night shift continues to be the right shift for you, given that the situation has been affecting you and that the affecting may continue. There are no immediate openings on other shifts, but openings do occur, and I would be willing to recommend you for a different shift if one becomes available, on the grounds of your length of service and your good performance. The change would involve a small reduction in pay because the night shift includes a differential that the other shifts do not include. I want you to know the option exists." I told her I would think about it. I thanked her for the conversation. I left her office. I went home. I have been thinking about it for the past 3 weeks. I have not made a decision yet. The video camera has not been installed. Karen has been pushing for it, by her account in our subsequent communications. But the facilities department has been slow to respond. The elevator has continued to open by itself, although less frequently than during the weeks before I sent the letter. The openings have occurred twice in the past 3 weeks, both times in the early morning hours, and both times with no object left in the lobby afterward. The elevator opens. The doors stay open for between 1 and 2 minutes. The doors close. The elevator returns to its closed state. I have been documenting each opening in my notebook. I have been continuing to take the stairs. I have not received any more phone calls from voices that sound like dead people. The phone at the circulation desk has rung occasionally for ordinary reasons, with calls from students or from other staff or from automated systems, and the calls have all been ordinary. I want to tell you what I have decided to do, although I want to be clear that the decision is provisional and that I may revise it depending on what happens in the coming weeks. I have decided to continue working the night shift for the rest of the current academic year. The academic year ends in late May. I will have completed approximately 8 more months on the night shift by that point. I have decided to use the 8 months to finish the coursework for my master's degree, which I am close to completing. I have decided to apply for a different position within the library at the end of the academic year, when there are typically several openings as graduating staff move on to other institutions. I have decided to take whatever non-overnight position is available, even if the pay is lower, even if the position is less interesting, even if the position requires me to start over, in some respects in terms of seniority and routine. I have decided this because I have come to believe that I cannot continue to work in the library indefinitely with the situation continuing. The situation has not gone away. Yet the situation has not become quieter in the sustained way that Constance experienced after she stopped using the elevator. The situation has continued to manifest in different forms for the past 15 months. The phone call from the voice that sounded like Constance was, by my interpretation, a signal that the situation has methods I had not previously been aware of. I do not know what other methods the situation might develop. I do not want to find out by experiencing them while alone in the building during the overnight hours. I have decided to apply for a different position because I have come to believe that working in the library during normal hours, with other staff present, will be a meaningfully different experience than working alone overnight. The situation has, by every available indication, been confined to the overnight hours. The reports Karen described from previous night librarians have all been from night staff. The situation has not been observed, as far as I am aware, by day staff or by students or by visitors. I believe that working in the library during normal hours will allow me to continue to use the building, to access the tuition remission and the other benefits of my employment, while removing me from the specific conditions under which the situation occurs. I have decided not to leave the university. I have considered leaving. I have come to believe that the situation is tied to the building rather than to me, and that working at a different institution would not necessarily resolve any larger problem. I have come to believe also that the practical considerations of changing employers, not including the loss of tuition remission and the disruption to my master's program, are significant enough that they outweigh the benefits of leaving entirely. I am going to stay at the university and try to find a different position within it. I want to tell you what I'm going to do with the materials Constance left me, because the disposition of the materials is something I have been thinking about. I have decided to keep the materials. I have decided to add to them with my own documentation of the situation as it has developed during my time as the night librarian. I have decided that when I leave the night librarian position, I will pass the materials on to whoever takes over the position after me. I will not pass them on directly, because I do not want to be in the position Constance was in, out of repeatedly contacting the next night librarian and trying to warn them. I will instead arrange for the materials to be available to the next night librarian if they choose to seek them out. I have decided to do this by storing the materials in a specific location within the library, in a way that the next night librarian will be likely to discover if they begin experiencing the situation. The location I have chosen is the bottom drawer of the desk in the small office adjacent to the circulation desk, which is used by the night librarian for personal storage during shifts. The drawer has a lock, and the key to the lock is kept in a small box on top of the desk. The next night, librarian will have access to the drawer. I will leave the materials in the drawer, in a labeled folder. It's with a brief note explaining what they are and how I came to have them. The note will explain that the materials were given to me by the family of Constance Whitbeck, who was the night librarian from 1979 to 1986, and that Constance had compiled the materials over her decades of researching the elevator situation. The note will tell the next night librarian that they are free to read the materials or to ignore them, and that the materials are being left for their use if they need them. I have decided to do this because I have come to believe that the chain of information that has been passed between night librarians at this library should continue. Constance kept the materials for 38 years and gave them to her son with instructions to pass them on. Her son passed them to me. I will pass them to the next night librarian, in whatever form they take. The materials may not be useful to the next night librarian. The next night librarian may not experience the situation. The materials may sit in the drawer untouched for years. But the materials will be available if needed. I have decided not to include in the materials any reference to the phone call I received from the voice that sounded like Constance. I have decided this because the phone call is the kind of information that would, by my judgment, be more frightening than useful to the next night librarian. The phone call would suggest, accurately, that the situation has methods that go beyond the elevator itself. The next night librarian, by my hope, will be able to manage the situation by avoiding the elevator the way Constance and I both managed it. Now, as the phone call would suggest that avoiding the elevator may not be sufficient, I have decided to keep the phone call to myself in my private notebook, rather than including it in the materials I leave for the next person. I want to tell you, finally, about the elevator itself. The elevator opened by itself 2 nights ago, which was the most recent opening before I am recording this final part of the story. The opening occurred at approximately 3:14 a.m. The doors opened. The elevator was empty. The interior lights were on. The display showed the first floor. I sat at the circulation desk, as I have done during every opening. I watched the elevator. The doors remained open for approximately 2 minutes. The doors began to close. As the doors were closing, I heard a sound from inside the elevator. The sound was small, yet the sound was the kind of sound you would make if you cleared your throat softly. The sound was a single sound, lasting less than a second. The sound came from inside the elevator, just before the doors closed all the way. I do not know what the sound was. I do not know whether the sound was made by something that was in the elevator that I had not been able to see from my position at the desk, or whether the sound was made by some mechanism of the elevator itself, or whether the sound was something I imagined in the moment. I logged the sound in my notebook. I logged the time, the duration of the opening, and the description of the sound. I finished my shift. I went home. I am recording this final part of the story because I have come to believe that the story has reached a natural stopping point. The situation is continuing. The situation is, by every indication, going to continue indefinitely. The situation will continue after I leave the night librarian position. The situation will continue after the next night librarian takes over. The situation has continued for at least 60 years and will, by every reasonable inference, continue for as long as the library exists in its current form. I do not have a resolution. I do not have an explanation. I have only the observations I have made, the materials Constance left me, and the routine I have developed for managing the situation while I continue to work at the library. I am going to leave the night shift in 8 months. I am going to leave the materials for the next person. I am going to move on to whatever position becomes available and to whatever life I can build in the years afterward. I want to tell you a few things to consider. If you are watching this and you ever take a position as a night librarian at a university library, particularly at a library that was built on land that was previously used for other purposes. If you ever find yourself receiving book requests from students whose names you cannot verify in the university directory, please do not retrieve the books. Please log the requests in your notebook with a note that the students do not exist. Please respond to any subsequent inquiries about the requests by indicating that the books were unavailable. Please do not use any equipment that the request would require you to use, particularly elevators that have been on a maintenance watch list. The requests are, by my experience, the means by which the situation gets you into the elevator. If you ever find that an elevator opens by itself in your building during overnight hours, please do not enter the elevator. Please document the opening. Please do not approach the elevator while the doors are open. Please continue your work as if the opening had not occurred. The opening is, by my experience, an invitation. The invitation can be declined. If you ever find a note on the floor of the lobby after such an opening, please pick up the note and read it, because the note may contain information that is useful to you. Please do not respond to the note in any direct way. Please do not write a reply. Please do not address the note's author. Please simply read the note and add it to your documentation. The notes have been, in my experience, attempts to communicate, but the communication does not require your response. The communication continues whether you respond or not. If you ever receive a phone call from a voice that you recognize as belonging to someone who has died, please hang up. Please do not engage with the voice. Please do not ask the voice questions. Please do not let the voice draw you into a conversation that the voice has prepared in advance. The voice is, by my best understanding, not the person it sounds like. The voice is something that has access to recordings or memories of the person, and that is using the voice to attempt to invoke your trust. The voice does not deserve your trust. If you ever come into possession of materials that a previous night librarian has left for you, please read the materials carefully. Please consider that the previous night librarian had reasons for compiling the materials and for passing them on. Please consider that the materials may contain information that you will not be able to find through your own research, because the previous night librarian had decades to gather the information, and you do not. Please use the materials. Please add to them. Please pass them on to whoever comes after you, in whatever form is appropriate. If you ever decide that the situation has become untenable and that you need to leave the position, please leave. Please do not stay because you feel a sense of obligation to the previous night librarians, or to the library, or to the institution. Please prioritize your own safety and your own well-being. The library will continue to exist whether or not you are working at it. The situation will continue to manifest whether or not you are present to observe it. Your continued presence is not necessary to the library's operation in any deep sense. You are replaceable. The next night librarian will replace you. Please do not let the institution's need for a night librarian outweigh your own need to be safe. I am going to stop recording now. I have a shift in 5 hours. I am going to sleep for a few hours before the shift. I am going to take the stairs at the library the way I have been taking them for the past 15 months. I am going to sit at the circulation desk and do my work. I am going to watch the elevator in case it opens. I am going to continue documenting what I observe. The elevator is, by my best understanding, going to keep doing what it does. The notes are going to keep appearing, occasionally, as the phone is going to ring, occasionally, with voices I should not be hearing. The impossible floor is going to remain accessible by some mechanism I do not understand, for as long as the elevator exists in its current form. The chair is going to remain in the room with the open door, waiting. I am not going to enter the elevator. I am not going to use the key Walter Brennan gave to Constance, and that Constance gave to me. I am not going to investigate the impossible floor. I am not going to try to determine what the situation wants, beyond what I have already understood. I am going to do my job. I am going to leave the position when I can. I am going to live whatever life I can build afterward, in whatever location and in whatever circumstances are available to me. I am going to stop recording now. The recording is over.